G'day everyone, welcome to another Azure RoundUP session. This time we're going to be talking about GitHub Actions, and today we've got Dipanjan Ghosh, and hopefully I said that correctly again, Dip, who I've worked with for a long time, and he's going to talk to us, as I said, about GitHub Actions. So over to you, Dip.
Thank you, and thanks for getting me in today. We are going to talk about GitHub Action in action, and I have very few slides because it's all about showing you how it works. So I'm going to actually crack open GitHub as well and show you what it really means and what GitHub Action really is. Before that, I'll just quickly introduce myself. My name is Dipanjan Ghosh, and again, welcome all of you to this one. And quickly about me, I've done multiple hats, both inside and outside Microsoft. I've been a developer, consultant, been a consultant in Microsoft, cloud solution architect, and so on. And right now, work with the worldwide learning team. So that's who I am. And today, we are going to get with GitHub Actions. So let me share my screen. A lot of people talk to me about GitHub Actions, because it's around one and a half years old, and I'll talk a little bit more about how it kind of came into being. And what is GitHub Actions? Well, GitHub Actions is nothing but a CI/CD tool. Now, if you ask me what is a CI/CD tool, it's not a new concept. It's been around for a long time. Talk about Jenkins, talk about Travis CI, Cruise Control, even our own Azure DevOps. We have CI/CD pipeline forever. But GitHub Action is essentially built inside the tool itself. So if you are, if you're writing your code, you already have your code repository in GitHub. Now you can build your CI/CD pipeline right in the code itself or in the repository itself, rather than handing it over to another tool. So that is why it is so very exciting for a lot of people. So if I take a step back, a lot of people ask me then, what is DevOps? Well, frankly, today's fast-paced environment, when applications are going faster, you get releases every day, every second in big applications. You get you are working with microservices, etc. You want smaller and faster deliveries of your production code, as well as ideally without a bug. So for those kind of things, you want really dependable automations and ways you can deploy or build your applications and deploy it. And when you build your application, it's not just building, right? You want to do testing, you want to do security checks, etc. So that is what your DevOps is, and that is what GitHub Actions would help in. And what is CI/CD? Well, CI/CD is continuous integration and continuous deployment, which is the overall end-to-end action from writing your code to have something on your environment, be it your dev test or a production environment. All right.
So this Sorry, mate. This is tools that sit within GitHub, correct? Or is it tools that sit within an Azure service that we've got?
Yeah, so that's a good question. So this particular one, GitHub Actions, actually sits inside GitHub environment itself. But you're right. If you think of, and that's a good point, right, for this slide as well. If you think of Azure DevOps, GitHub is almost like a first-class integrator with Azure DevOps, and our customers and we have all been doing writing our code in GitHub sometimes, in GitHub environment, and then we would, as we do some actions, we would put it into our Azure DevOps, where we are going to do our CI and CD pipelines. You're doing our workflows and so on and so forth. But in this case, you don't have to do it. If you don't want to, you can keep your code in the same environment of GitHub itself and run your CI/CD pipeline there, rather than doing that handover. So, if you are doing it now, for a lot of customers, it would just make sense. If GitHub is their primary code repository, it would just make sense to not hand over to any other environment. But if possible, write their CI/CD pipeline in straight into GitHub itself. So yes, it is all in the GitHub environment.
Awesome.
Not outside. Yeah. And that is exactly why, as I was suggesting here, is the choice of developers, because as you know, GitHub is a heart of open source development for a long, long time. We had our own code repositories. We have Azure DevOps, where enterprises usually write their code and do it. But right now, of course, the open source developers, as well as Microsoft customers or any other customers for that matter write and put their code in, and then they of course then look into how they can do their overall ALM. With GitHub Actions now, it's so much easier to do their CI/CD pipeline. And if you think of that, it's kind of the same ecosystem. So if you think of a scenario, right, where you're writing your code, say for example in Visual Studio Code, we have first-class integrator with GitHub. So you write your code, you do a quick check-in, your code get checked into GitHub, and then automatically, depending on what kind of triggers and pipelines that you put in, it starts then doing their actions and then move into different environments as you write. So you're not really going in and out of different environments. It's kind of working in the same plane, which is very important for a lot of people. All right. And that takes us to triggers. Now, what are these triggers? Of course, you've created a pipeline, you've put a bunch of tasks in there. How does it all work, right? So that is where GitHub Action triggers come into place. One of the most popular trigger, or some of the most popular triggers, would be your check-ins, or what we call as pushes. So you push into one of the branches or your main branch, etc., or you want to merge. There are different actions that or triggers that you can create from there, and then you can start working with your pipelines. Most of the time, it would be your branches where different developers are working with different features or branches, and then as they trigger, they can run their different workflows. But frankly, you can trigger actions or different other things from different other triggers as well. For example, if you are doing bugs, or if you are checking in bugs, you can trigger a workflow from the bugs, and then you can take some actions there as well. So not just check-ins and checkouts, you can do triggers from different other things that GitHub as an environment supports. So that's also something to keep in mind. All right. So let's get into our GitHub and look into some GitHub actions. Just give me a second. I'll get my environment up. So there you go. As you see, this is a normal GitHub page. It's essentially one of my repositories. I have a few. So this is just a repository where I have an application there. This is just a simple application with with static files, essentially, JavaScripts and CSS and stuff like that. Nothing too complicated. And if you see this is my code. Essentially, this is my repository, and you would see that this action this tab has kind of sneaked in last few years. And you might ask, do I see it? If I open my GitHub, do I have this, or do I have to do something else to get this tab? The answer is, well, this tab sort of started getting into everybody's GitHub around 1.5 years back. It was in a preview mode, so it wasn't in everybody's environment. It was slowly sneaking in, but right now it's there everywhere. It's globally, so you don't have to do anything. Yeah, so you don't have to do anything special. If you just open a repository, the actions are right there for you to see.
Right. So I was going to say, I don't think I've actually seen the actions tab. I'm tempted to jump into my GitHub repository right now to see if it's there. So you're saying I don't need to go and do anything specific now. It will just appear inside the repository.
Yes. So had it been 1 year back, around this time, if you were talking about this, chances were that it might be showing in yours and not mine, because they were spreading it out in phases and rings, I guess. But now it's everywhere. So yes, happy for you to go in and have a check and play with it if possible. Why not?
Yeah, I might do that while you're talking.
Yeah. All right. So let's get into that tab and see what we have in offer. So as you could see, I have a bunch of workflows running, and there's a nice dashboard where you could see your workflows that have previously run. So you can actually drill into those and see how it went and what the logs are. So before I show one of those, let's see what happens when you do it for the first time. So when you get in for the first time and you're doing from the portal itself, what happens is you start getting a lot of those initial templates. Now, as you could see, I have templates for Node.js, for web apps. I have for ACKs, I have from Amazon ECS, Kubernetes services, OpenShift, heaps and heaps of templates that's already existing, which is really nice, right? Because if you like, you can start writing your workflow right from the scratch. But you might always want to start with a template. And as you know, GitHub is good for open source. So you see that there is Ruby, there is Node.js, there is Python, there's heaps of CC++, heaps of templates that's already for there to use. So if I want to pick one, just as an example, there's a deploy Node.js to Azure Web App. Let's have a look into that. So if I click on that, you would see that it is actually behind the scenes creating a workflow file for me. Now, if I just save it right now, I just do a start commit, what would happen is this file would be saved as Azure YAML. So this essentially is your workflow file. Now, I can name it test or whatever name that you think is good for your workflow file. You can put it there. Behind the scenes, it goes and sits under the workflows folder in your code repository. Now, what this thing is essentially your workflow. And if you see the syntax, these are all in YAML notation. So these are all in YAML file. So this is your build document. This is your tasks. And on your right, again, very similar, I guess, look and feel. If you're coming from Azure DevOps, you would see these featured actions. So these are essentially actions for Marketplace. You can search for some actions. You can select some action if you think that that might help. You can just select one and then copy that particular YAML snippet, much like in Azure DevOps nowadays, right? If you do that, you would see that comes through, and you can just copy and paste it. Yeah,
sorry,
ahead.
mate. Is that a similar scenario to those who wouldn't have necessarily used Azure DevOps in the past? Other tools?
Good question. Look, is it similar to Azure DevOps in terms of YAML? It is similar, but the YAMLs are not the same. So if you have actually worked with YAML in Azure DevOps, and if you think that is it the same syntax or similar, look, there will be overlaps, but the concept is similar. But there obviously the keywords, etc. of YAML here is a bit different than what we have in Azure DevOps. But if you work with YAML file, for example, because maybe you have used containers before, etc., then you would understand the syntax. It's fine. Yeah, if you work with
So anyone who's used YAML, irrelevant whether you use Azure DevOps or GitHub or other tools like Jenkins, as you were saying earlier, they'd probably find this fairly familiar.
Fairly familiar, yeah. Look, there might be some overlaps, but there are nuances in every environment, and they're not the same. So you essentially can't copy paste it. Although I know that Visual Studio team is really listening to everyone, and they are working on a ways of how do we create those mappings between Azure DevOps and GitHub Actions, and if you can do some of those nice things behind the scenes. But yeah, they are a bit different at this point in time.
Cool.
All right. So what I'll do is I'll cancel this because I already have a workflow file there, and let's go look at that. So this is my GitHub workflow file. So I'm just going to look at that. So this is my task workflow that I'm using. So I'm just going to open that up, and let's walk through some of this as we understand it. So what I'm going to do is break down my YAML file for all of us to have an understanding of what those essentially means and what am I doing there, right? So if you look at here, first of all, the name. So this is the name of my workflow, and this is something that you can put in whatever you like. The next bit that I'm looking at is my trigger, right? So in this point in time, I'm doing it on the trigger of push on my main branch, right? And then I'm also kind of annotating all the actions that I am doing at that point in time and what I can get the trigger on. So this is your trigger bit, right? So on this trigger, what are we going to do? Now that is where the job segment comes in. The job essentially is all your tasks that you want to line up together. Okay, so all your tasks would be under jobs. So in this case, you would see that I have kind of two jobs that are lined up in my YAML sections. I'm just going to walk through the first one just for you to understand what it really means. So this is my first job. You have a name for that. You can actually put conditions. In this case, I said, again, if the condition is push, etc., you work with. runs on is your environment. Now, in this case, I've said it's going to run on Ubuntu latest. Again, you can actually put in version, etc., or any other other sort of OS you want to run your built-in. For me, Ubuntu latest is fine, so I'm okay with it. And then comes the steps. So this is essentially your workflow steps that you are going to do. In here, in my steps, I'm using uses. So these uses are your actions. In this case, what I'm doing is an action called checkout at v2. Now you might ask, what is this, right? Now these are very much equal to what we have in terms of actions in Azure DevOps. Remember, you drag and drop an action, and then that action actually owns it. It's essentially exactly the same thing. Behind the scenes, what happened is, even in GitHub also, we have a repo called actions, and in that repo, there are already these pre-made actions that are there for computes. And so we have something pre-built called checkout at v2 that is already there as an action. So all I'm doing is I'm sort of calling that tag or calling that action from an existing GitHub action. All right, so I'm calling that. And look, this is if it's a deployment, you might not be checking out, because your deployment might happen after a build where the packages and artifacts is already there. So you might not be using that at all. But this is just an example. With is where you pass parameters externally. So for example, this particular task gives you an option to provide external parameter variables. So in this case, in the with, I have one, which is submodules, and I'm passing the value true, right? And then the name and ID is what you would put in. And in this case, again, uses, again, this is another action that I'm picking from GitHub Actions. And in this case, this particular one essentially goes ahead and deploys my artifact in Azure DevOps, in Azure environment, right? And also I have to pass some external parameters, which is with, and you would see that I'm passing a bunch of tokens and credentials, etc. Obviously, in Azure DevOps, in Azure environment, you can't just randomly deploy things, right? You need to have the right permissions, RBAC roles and policies, and you need to pass those tokens, etc. So that is what it's asking for as an external parameter. Okay. Now you might ask me, what are these, and how do I do this? Do these, because this might be secret, because I don't want to write my token right here.
Yeah. I was going to ask that, actually. I was going to ask, is this now? I mean, with the tokens, is this a GitHub token, or is this a token within? How do they get the token? Is it something they need to do for I'm assuming inside Azure here, because you're pushing to an Azure environment, or is this something we need to do within GitHub as a personal secret, for example?
Yeah, so you're right. So look, because in this particular case, I'm deploying in Azure environment. So this would be your user principal. Essentially, that's something that we need to get from Azure AD, or the user principal that we need to support. So that would essentially come from Azure environment or Azure AD itself. How we do this and how we keep our secrets, I'm just going to quickly show you. So if you see on the top tabs, you have a setting here. So if I open my settings here, GitHub actually gives a very nice way of keeping your secrets.
Got it.
So if you come down here, you would have secret options right here. And this is where you can actually create a repository secret.
Right.
And so you can put your tokens here. As you could see, I have a bunch of them here. And then you can directly assign it back to your workflow file. So you can do that.
Now I can see it's got the update button and the remove button there. So I assume you can revoke and then change the token if it's been compromised.
That's exactly right. And good that you talked about compromise, because also remember that this is not overall GitHub scope. These are all repository scope. So even if one gets compromised, it's localized, and other repositories and other parts of your GitHub still remains fine. So good point there.
Yeah. Also, no, so that's I was going to say that's really good, because of the fact that one of the issues we do see from a security perspective is the fact that a lot of people who do go and put their secrets in their code and then go and push their code out to GitHub, it can be scraped, and then that can obviously be used for not great purposes.
Yes.
So that's really good.
And we have seen that, right? In the old school of working, we have scraped GitHub and seen thousands of open, connections, etc., which is not fun. And I think this is something that we should absolutely aim for. And somebody who's working with Azure might ask, hey, can we use Key Vault? Absolutely. There's a way of tagging Key Vault as well, and you can directly refer the Key Vault keys directly to your workflow as well. So that can be done.
Great.
All
Thanks,
right. No problem. All right. So that's a quick walkthrough of what it really means and how the structure is done. So tomorrow, if you're actually handwriting your own, workflow, you should know what you're doing. All right. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to my workflow page and maybe just trigger a workflow for us to check how that overall thing works. As you could see, a bunch of them going. So let me open my Visual Studio Code. So this is my Visual Studio Code. This is the code that is in the repository. So that's all working there. One thing, a cool trick that I'm going to also talk about, which I learned very recently, was that if you are creating a file and you want to work it around, you can actually directly do it from Visual Studio Code. For example, if I'm creating the YAML file or the workflow file right from Visual Studio Code itself, what I can do is I can just write and then I can just do I can just say just and if I save it, it automatically saves it in the right folder, and it would actually save it straight up in GitHub when I push as well. So it's a really nifty tool to do it. You can actually do fully qualified names right here itself if you like.
And do you have to add any particular extension in VS Code to be able to do that?
No, you just do add files, and you as if you know your repository structure, you can just put the structure in and off you go. Yes, for YAML file, you're right. As you could see, I have done .yml, so that's YAML file. You can do YAML as well. Both are supported. I just wrote the one which has one less letter, but both files are supported. So that's all good. Anyway, so I'm just going to delete that one because I really don't need it. I have already, so this is the file. I've just made a change here. I'm just going to, for the time, I'm just going to stage this particular change. Let it happen. And I'm just going to put the message as demo test for our Monday. Yeah, it is.
I wonder how many check-ins in GitHub would be called demo or demo test.
Yeah, definitely not the best practice. You should write the right thing depending on what the work you have checked in. So I'm just doing a quick staging, and once that happens, I would just go ahead and push it. I'm at this point just pushing it all to all origins. I have a lot of branches in there, so you would just push it to all my origins, and then that would trigger behind the scenes. As so it's done. So behind the scenes, if I go here now, and as you could see, it automatically triggered it, and it'll go ahead and take the actions what it needs to. So if you see and as you see, the demo test Monday comes up as the name of the that particular instance of the workflow as well. So it's quite nicely sort of integrated with your development environment, and
so that's running at the moment. That previous
that's running at the moment. I was just trying to show an old
nice
one. Look here, it's going through the build stage and will eventually get to my close stage as well. So yeah, that's a quick bits around actions, and I just wanted to show you guys how what it really is and how we can quickly integrate with our work environments, and how do we kickstart and do it.
Awesome, mate. That was great. I think for anyone who is using GitHub right now, and hasn't used another tool like some of the ones we talked about before, specifically DevOps was one of the ones you were referring to. I think it's great that now they've got that option to be able to do some workflows and create that through GitHub. So awesome. Thanks, Dip. Really appreciate you taking out the time today and showing us how to use GitHub Actions.
Thank you very much. Yes, if you have been using Azure DevOps, well, this is another tool that you can have a look at, especially if you are writing a lot of code in GitHub. Might make sense. Can I still do integration with GitHub and run my CI/CD pipelines in Azure DevOps? Absolutely, you can. But if you are looking for a new tool and your repository is GitHub, that's definitely something to look at as well.
So is that the main reason why you use GitHub Actions versus workflow or CI/CD pipeline in whatever particular tool you're using?
Look. Usually for an organization, if I say so, it is one tool or the other. You certify the tool and then you run with it. Azure DevOps integration is fantastic with heaps of repositories, be it Bitbucket, be it GitHub, be it Azure DevOps own repositories, etc. So it just makes a lot more sense in a sort of an environment or overall enterprise scale work. But if your codes all are in GitHub and you're starting for the first time in your organization, then you can always start with GitHub Actions rather than start provisioning another third-party tool to work with. So I would say those are the cases. Yeah.
Cool. And sounds great.
Yeah, and also one other thing that I wanted to quickly mention was a lot of people coming from GitHub, not GitHub, sorry, Azure DevOps. They asked me, hey, by the way, you wrote everything in one file. Here I actually have a release, I actually have a build, and I could structure it differently and whatnot. Can I do it in GitHub? The answer is yes. You can have number of workflow files depending on what action you want to take. In this case, I was doing a build and release in one. You can have different workflows to do that and then call from one to another, or you can write it in the same page but in different ways. So there are a few techniques that you can essentially do in GitHub Actions to separate those responsibilities as well.
Great. Awesome, mate. Well, thank you very much for taking out the time to do this for us. And for those watching, I hope you enjoyed it, and we'll have another Azure RoundUP session for you fairly soon. All right. Goodbye. See you, Dip. Thanks again.
Everyone. Thanks, George.